You know, if you've ever sat in a long boardroom meeting or maybe watched a tense political debate, you've probably heard someone confidently talk about cutting the Gordian knot. People throw it around constantly today as this ultimate metaphor for out-of-the-box thinking. But how often do we actually stop and think about where these phrases come from? Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we aren't just looking at some random linguistic quirk, we are literally time-traveling back over 2 millennia to solve an ancient cold case. By looking closely at the historical sources, we're going to unpack a massive story of ambition, propaganda, and honestly, a very stubborn piece of ancient rope. Okay, so let's start by totally anchoring ourselves right here in the present. The literal definition of cutting the Gordian knot is solving an unsolvable problem through force rather than patience. It represents a total, complete bypass of the established rules. You're not painstakingly untangling the threads of a complicated issue, you're taking a metaphorical axe to the whole situation and just walking away with the prize. But to truly grasp the weight of this definition and why on earth we're still using it thousands of years later, we need to meet the man who originated the move.
Picture this. The year is 333 BC. We are in the city of Gordium, right in the heart of Phrygia and central Anatolia. And to set the mood, it is the dead of winter. Alexander of Macedon, arguably the most driven military commander of the ancient world, has just arrived with this absolutely massive army. But instead of pushing forward, he does something surprising. He pauses his relentless campaign. He actually halts his entire army to visit a specific temple up on the Acropolis. And he isn't there for some strategic military advantage. No, he's there for a cart. Now, to understand why a simple, everyday cart would stop a world-conquering army in its tracks, we have to look at the legend behind it. Inside this temple sat an ancient ox cart totally steeped in local myth. Legend held that it originally belonged to a man named Gordius. He was just a poor farmer who, after fulfilling a local prophecy, was crowned king. His son, the famous Midas, then dedicated this exact cart to Zeus. But here's the real catch. The cart's yoke was lashed to its wooden pole by a remarkably complex knot made of cornel bark. This hardened bark was tied so impossibly tight that there was absolutely no visible seam and literally no visible end to the rope. For centuries, this physical puzzle had completely defeated every single person who tried to loosen it.
And this wasn't just some local tourist attraction or a fun little brain teaser. An ancient oracle had laid down a massive, world-altering prophecy. Whoever unties the knot would rule all of Asia. Just imagine the sheer, undeniable weight of those words. For an ambitious, hyper-competitive conqueror like Alexander the Great, leaving that knot tied was simply not an option. It was a direct challenge to his destiny. Untying it wouldn't just prove he was smart, it would grant him this aura of divine legitimacy over the vast empires he fully intended to conquer.
So the young conqueror steps right up to the ancient cart. And the funny thing is, Alexander doesn't immediately resort to his sword. Historical sources note that he initially tries to play by the rules. He examines the tangle closely. You can almost picture him standing there in the dim light of the temple, testing those rigid, ancient cornel bark fibers with his fingers, tracing the overlapping loops and looking in vain for a loose end. And yet, just like the hundreds of kings, generals, and scholars who came before him, he finds absolutely nothing. He is completely, utterly stumped. Which brings us to this really fascinating psychological pivot. What exactly do you do when you're a world conqueror and you just failed? I mean, Alexander is surrounded. His generals are watching his every move. The local temple priests are watching. He's stranded in the middle of a brutal winter campaign, and he has just been publicly defeated by a piece of bark. Admitting defeat right then and there would be a terrible omen for his army, and a huge blow to that carefully cultivated aura of invincibility. He needs a solution, and he needs it right now. And this is exactly why diving into history is so captivating, because the past is rarely just one straight monolithic line. We actually have 2 completely conflicting historical accounts of what happened next. On one hand, we have the really famous version. Ancient historians claim Alexander studied the knot for hours before just giving up, violently drawing his sword and slicing straight through the bark in a single stroke. Boom, done. But on the other hand, different historical records claim a much stealthier, cleverer method. They state he located a hidden pin holding the yoke to the pole, pulled it free, and simply slid the entire yoke loose without cutting a single thread. It's a fantastic reminder that, as we go through this explainer, we kind of get to play historical detective and evaluate the conflicting evidence ourselves. Well, however he actually pulled it off, the immediate aftermath was exactly the same. The knot lies open. Alexander immediately and very loudly declares the oracle's prophecy fulfilled. He has claimed his destiny. But it's highly notable that the local temple priests, the guys who attended to this shrine for generations, were, let's just say, less than thrilled. They never fully endorsed his method. They likely felt that hacking it with a sword or sliding out a hidden pin was a bit of a cheat, a massive violation of the spiritual spirit of the puzzle. But, as we know, Alexander wasn't one to let minor technicalities get in the way of a really good narrative. Let's look at how this builds into the absolute legend we know today. That very night, ancient writers describe a massive storm of thunder and lightning breaking over Gordium. Now, the priests, perhaps reading the room and realizing they are dealing with a heavily armed king, conveniently interpret this weather as a sign of absolute divine approval from Zeus himself. With that massive PR victory secured, Alexander leaves the city the very next morning. He rapidly marches his army east, toward Cilicia, toward Issus, and toward a fateful confrontation with Darius that will literally reshape the ancient world. Within a single decade, he does exactly what the prophecy promised, conquering Persia, Egypt, and land stretching all the way to India. And as Alexander marched, a brilliant propaganda campaign marched right alongside him, broadcasting this core, undeniable message. Destiny does not require patience, only decisiveness. The story of the knot actually spread like wildfire, moving faster than his own army. Soldiers repeated the tale around campfires at night. It reached the ears of citizens in distant Greek cities who had never even heard Alexander's name before. It was just the perfect marketing tool. It told the whole world that a literal force of nature was coming, a leader who didn't play by the slow, frustrating rules of the past, but one who carved his own path forward. Yet, despite all of this history-making, we're left with a really fascinating void. Today, absolutely no physical evidence of the knot, the yoke, or the cart survives. The temple itself crumbled long, long ago, its stones completely scattered and lost across the vast Anatolian plain. Because of this, historians continue to vigorously debate whether that dramatic sword-slicing story was actually true, or if it was just a piece of brilliant propaganda invented much later to flatter a conqueror who was already dead. But in a way, the physical truth is totally secondary, because the legend itself managed to entirely outlive the massive empire he built to prove it. You see, Alexander never stopped to explain to the priests or to history which version of the event was actually true. He simply rode on, marching toward the horizon. And in doing so, he left us with a legendary metaphor for out-of-the-box thinking that we are still using in our boardrooms and politics over 2,000 years later. It really begs the question, when it comes to the great narratives that shape our world, did the technical truth of how we solved the puzzle actually matter? If the legend itself inspired an empire? Take that thought with you, and until next time, keep questioning the narrative.